just a few days, Jews around the world will gather together to celebrate Purim and to read from Megillat Esther. This is the story of an ego-driven and indulgent king named Achashverosh, a man with unlimited power and seemingly unlimited resources. He is a rash and reckless man who relies heavily on advisors who are driven by selfish and sinister motives. Under this king's leadership, one particular advisor, Haman, has been granted unearned power and privilege in the king's court. This is a man with a bottomless need, as one scholar says, to punish those whom he perceives have punished him by not showing appropriate obsequiousness. When Mordecai the Jew shows up at the palace gates one day, he fails to approach Haman as deferentially as Haman demands, and Haman, slighted by a Jew, determines that he must take revenge on all Jews because that is how racism works. And the result is disastrous. The text of Megillat Esther is funny and sardonic and sarcastic and suspenseful. It is literarily rich and entertaining. But listen to Rambam in Hilchot Megillah v'Chanukah. It is a positive commandment to read the Megillah for everyone, even those generally exempt from positive time-bound mitzvot. Hearing the Megillah takes precedence over literally every other mitzvah. Nothing takes priority over this reading except for the burial of a corpse that has no one else to attend to it. And if you're the one who has to do that burial, bury and then read the Megillah. So why? We have to understand that the themes and the questions raised by Megillat Esther are not meant for our entertainment or for our laughter. These are instead eternal themes, eternal questions. To read of the vulnerability of the Jews of Shushan, we must ask, what is the fate of the Jew in the diaspora? What are the perils of Jewish powerlessness? And on the other hand, when we read of the revenge fantasy in chapter 9, when the Jews kill 75,811 people, we are faced with another critical and timeless question. What are the dangers inherent in Jewish power? The Megillah is full of eternal wisdom, teaching us that life is capricious and unstable, that catastrophe is always possible. Everything can turn upside down in an instant. And also that redemption is always possible. You have no idea how your story might end. This short book, which we read to jeers and grogs, which is interspersed with funny video spiel at IKAR, is deceptive in its simplicity. Among the profound truths that I've found in the lines of this text is drawn from one shocking line, one turning point moment in our narrative, when Haman approaches the king offering an obscene amount of money for the right to annihilate all of the Jews of the kingdom. There is a certain people, he says. They are scattered and dispersed among all of the other people in all of the provinces of your realm. They're different from us. Their laws are different. It is not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them anymore. And as you may recall, for the pleasure of this murderous rampage through the kingdom which Haman aspires to, he says that he is willing to pay 10,000 talents of silver, the rough equivalent of $226 million today. Now, the rabbis suggest that this payment was more than just an incentive for the king to agree with this indecent proposal. Haman recognized that dead Jews can't pay taxes, and so killing them would actually cost the treasury dearly, so his donation was actually an offer of compensation, a way of making the kingdom whole once he took care of the Jews. And this generous offer makes the king's response astonishing. Keep your money, the king says. You have not only my permission, you have my blessing. This is absolutely shocking. Why would the king, who has shown so far in our story no ill will toward the Jews, be so eager to see them destroyed that he would forego such a generous payment? We're left to wonder, is this king stupid or is he evil? The rabbis explain in Masechet Megillah through a story of two neighbors. One of them, you may recall, has a giant mound of dirt just taking up space in his backyard. He'd love to get rid of it. The other one has a huge ditch in his backyard. He would love to fill it. The two of them live like this for some time until one day the one with the ditch turns to his neighbor and says, "Would you sell me some of your dirt so I can fill my ditch?" And the owner, anxious to rid himself of the excess dirt on his property, responds, "Halavai, are you kidding me? I will give this dirt to you for free." So too, Achashverosh must have harbored the fantasy of the Jews of his kingdom disappearing. Esther Rabbah, the Midrash on Megillat Esther, even indicates that Achashverosh must have hated the Jews even more than Haman the wicked. And so the moment that Haman offers to do the dirty work, literally to take the dirt, the Jews, off of the king's hands, the king's subterranean fantasy of ridding himself of the Jews emerges into the light of day, and that's why the king accepts no money from Haman. They're doing each other a favor. For years now, I have sat with this conclusion. One man's hatred for Mordechai and the Jews alone was not sufficient to create the conditions for annihilation. It was only when Haman's hatred met up with the subtler hatred in the heart of the king that the Jews' lives were truly in danger. And so here we have the Megillah, masquerading as parody, as spoof, as a story of feasts and fantasy, revealing an important, perhaps counterintuitive truth about the way that anti-Semitism manifests in the world both then and now. The great danger I have learned from this text is not one anti-Semitism or the other. It's when the conditions of our society allow for a flourishing of anti-Semitism for multiple quarters at once. It's been 6 years since I first encountered this Gemara that changed my thinking. And it awakened me to the absurdity, to the futility, to the danger of a discourse that simultaneously denies the prevalence of anti-Semitism on the left while decrying it on the right, a default position for so many in our movements for justice. The failure in this camp to hold people to account for what is obviously ever present is terribly painful, and it is undermining of all claims to a just and liberatory future for all of us. And yes, this text also awakened me to the danger of an entire industry of anti-Semitism organizations and professionals that vociferously defend anti-Semites on the right, while excoriating anyone who speaks out for the rights of Palestinians as a dangerous Jew hater. This is clear to me. The greatest threat facing our safety as a Jewish community is not anti-Semitism from the left or anti-Semitism from the right. It is the fact of the ubiquitousness of anti-Semitism, the normalization of anti-Semitism all around us. Alas, now, another year, another series of congressional hearings, ostensibly trying to hold universities to account for an increasingly violent and extreme anti-Semitism. Don't I applaud these efforts? The fact that there are finally grown-ups in the room, a joint task force to combat anti-Semitism, determined to hold to account the institutions that have so utterly failed to protect our Jewish kids, my Jewish kid. For 17 months, Some of these universities have fallen into a moral quagmire of their own making, failing to offer clear guidelines and protocols that would honor the right to protest, that would honor free speech, all while keeping all students safe. For 17 months, my kid and her friends have been crying out about their experience on campus, and I, by extension, have been gaslit along with them by many of my own friends and allies who simply cannot accept the reality of what they are reporting to us because it does not fit into the rigid confines of our understanding of how movements for justice work. I've heard many people say that they are heartened this week, that finally someone is saying that it's not right for Jewish students to be threatened and marginalized in universities, kicked out of clubs. Finally, someone is objecting to these classes being disrupted, to dorms being flyed with jackboots stomping on Jewish stars, with images of machine guns and the words, "The enemy will be eliminated." Finally, someone willing to offer unequivocal condemnation for students met on their way out of Shabbos dinner with, "Go back to Poland." But no, I am not heartened. Our saviors have not arrived. Ted Cruz is not our Queen Esther. And none of these efforts have made the Jews safer. Because I know that these efforts, including denying my alma mater, the epicenter of some of the dumbest and most shocking displays of overt anti-Semitism, denying that university $400 million and threatening to deport students who engage in protest, these measures do not emerge from a genuine desire to keep our kids safe. These efforts are driven by political operatives who claim that they are simply trying to ensure that institutions that receive federal funding are in compliance with federal anti-discrimination requirements. And yet it is these same political operatives, literally the same people, who are leading the fight to defund the Office of Civil Rights and who are putting pressure on the EEOC to no longer prosecute cases of discrimination against employers who are blatantly harassing and discriminating against trans and non-binary people. So no, I don't believe that they are genuinely interested in fighting discrimination, nor are they genuinely interested in fighting anti-Semitism. Now, how do we know this? Because these same characters fawn over the wealthiest and most powerful man alive, defending his support of the neo-Nazi party in Germany and his repeated use of the Nazi salute. No, a Heil Hitler is not just an awkward gesture. These same warriors against anti-Semitism perpetuate Nazi-era imagery of the Jewish billionaire controlling the purse strings of the government. These same warriors against anti-Semitism will platform and amplify the voices of their hard-right anti-Semitic influencers. In fact, these same operatives are the mirror image. They rely on precisely the same dangerous images and conspiracy theories of some of the student protesters that they are now threatening with deportation. These hearings, the defunding, the threats of militarized campuses and rewritten curricula, these are extreme acts. And I understand why they may feel instinctively comforting to some in the Jewish community. Finally, someone is listening to us. But please hear me, that these actions themselves constitute a form of anti-Semitism. What may feel today like a welcomed embrace is actually putting us at even graver danger. We, the Jews, are being used now to advance a political agenda that will cause grave harm to the social fabric and to the institutions that are best suited to protect Jews and all minorities. We are being used. Our pain, our trauma is being exploited to eviscerate the dream of a multiracial democracy while advancing toward the goal of a white Christian nation. And this tactic, Jews as a scapegoat to divide our society and to weaken democratic norms, this is not new. This is a playbook that has been used by authoritarians of the far right and the far left, those whose interest is in sowing division, in justifying repressive policies, and distracting the population from the truly nefarious and rapacious agenda that it is advancing before our eyes at warped speed. I again turn to Hannah Arendt, who warns of exactly this in The Origins of Totalitarianism. Anti-Semitism, she writes, was the ideological weapon for the destruction of the old order. It served to absolve new movements of all responsibility for the upheaval that they were engendering. So please hear this. Totalitarian leaders used anti-Semitism to shift blame away from their own destructive policies, ultimately framing Jews as the cause of the pain that the people were experiencing as a result of their own repressive actions. Ultimately, Arendt concludes that it was the Jews who were held responsible for the destruction of all national structures. In a time in which the old world order is being remade before our eyes, we would do very well to heed this call. Jews paradoxically blamed for both the protests and the repressive response to them, for both globalism and nationalism, capitalism and communism, are the perfect wedge. We are the perfect wedge for those who are seeking to dissolve and to destroy our democracy. And here's just one small proof text of that for you. Recently, the right-wing think tank that was responsible for creating Project 2025 released a national strategy for combating anti-Semitism. This was written not by Jews, but by Christian Zionists. This policy brief is, as my friends Rabbi Amichai Lau-Levi and Julie Dorff describe it, a grotesque abuse, instrumentalizing the fight against genuine anti-Semitism among people of goodwill in order to bring down all dissent and liberal civil society in the United States. It is an affront to Jews, and it is dangerous for America. And that foundation called this plan, unfathomably, Project Esther. This is not only a gross act of appropriation of our sacred text, this is a pernicious deception, and we must not be fooled. Listen, Megillat Esther seems to have a happy ending. After near annihilation, the Jews are saved. They witness the transformation, meyagon l'simcha, me'evel l'yom tov. From terrible devastation to elated joy, from grief to festivity. They make a feast, they send sweet gifts to one another, they take care of the poor, they have survived. But we would not be wrong to feel unsettled as the story closes and we roll back up this sacred scroll Thursday night. The whole thrust of the narrative is that life is capricious and uncertain, and that the whole world turns upside down again and again and again. It would be impossible for us not to predict that a chapter 11 will follow after the happy ending of chapter 10. Political upheaval, the Megillah seems to be warning us, is a condition of diaspora. The relative calm of the past decades for Jews in America has been an exception. The rule is turmoil, and our survival depends on us learning how to navigate that. I keep imagining these days that we are traversing a stormy sea in a rickety boat, and with every wave, we are being thrown to the right and thrown to the left. And I feel a call from deep within my soul to drop an anchor and to withstand this storm without losing my heart and without losing my mind. In order to do so, you and I We'll need to defy the norms and the storms by anchoring together, by anchoring in community, by anchoring in our values, by anchoring in our courage, by drawing up our resiliency like Queen Esther did. Not the appropriated Queen Esther of the upside-down world of white Christian nationalism, but in the spirit of the real Esther, the courageous, beautiful, humble, and wise Persian Jewish queen of our ancient sacred story. Ken Yehi Ratzon, let us be like Esther was.